let's talk about ITIL and IT Service Management. Okay, so one of the objectives in your syllabus is that in this class we learn to talk about some of the principles of IT Service Management. And in fact, one of the guidebooks that we have for how you manage IT services in an organization is called ITIL. The definition of ITIL is a set of practices related to IT service management, although even that's not perfect. When I think of ITIL, it is a set of practices, but it's embedded in a book. So you buy a book and it has kind of like an index of all these different areas of IT services that you could manage. And for each of those different areas, it talks about how you could take a particular service and align it with a business need, or how you could implement a service for a business that's an IT-based service, and how you could implement it using, in any chapter of the book, procedures, tasks, checklists, etc. So it's not organization specific. It's high-level categories that could belong to any organization as it relates to their IT function, and there's a lot of different services that you could offer within them, and ITIL gives you some guidelines for how you would do that. So another way to think about this might be, that there's project management, and if you're going to be in the project management discipline, you have the PMI Book of Knowledge. Well, this is for IT service management. If you're going to manage IT services, here's the Book of Knowledge, all of the procedures and the areas that you could offer services in as it relates to IT. All right, so let's just kind of get our head around this whole idea of services for a second here, because this is an important thing to contrast from just implementing software or writing a piece of software and checking it into the code repository. All right, so one example of a service would be, imagine that for our company, Paradise Donut Company, that we want to launch a new service, which is demand forecasting. Now, traditionally, donut shops just make a wild guess. They're pretty low technology. They make a wild guess in terms of how many donuts they should have in a certain day, and if they make too many, they throw them away at the end of the day. So if you ever become a homeless person, you can go dumpster diving, and there's always like a bag of donuts behind any donut store. That used to fascinate me in high school, and I never did it, but I always was concerned about the donuts that were going to waste in the back of donut stores. Anyway, or if they don't make enough, of course, that's a problem because there's lost revenue that could be there. So a good service that could be offered by a company or by the parent company of a donut franchise would be this ability to forecast the demand for donuts. And this is different than an application. It's a service because it needs to be available. It needs to be first off created, but more importantly, it needs to be available every single day like a utility. Okay, and so in terms of IT organizations, an organizations like BYU, if you go to my second bullet point, are going to have potentially thousands of services that they might offer to their organization. And as a service, there's an expectation in terms of uptime or reliability or level of functionality that it has. Expectations might include like what day of the week is this service offered and how late into the night is it offered and things like that. So here's a question. You might want to just pause the video for a second. What could go wrong if you're operating an IT service that a business relies on or an organization relies on? So just pause for a minute and think about that. And hopefully you considered the second thing, which is how could you avoid those problems? Okay, well, hopefully what I talk about throughout the course of this is going to help you answer that question better. Okay, so I'm going to hit these bullet points again, but my summary of what ITIL and the books of ITIL are all about is that IT organizations have a catalog of services that might range into the thousands. How you deliver those services are in part defined by the service level agreements that you provide related to each of those services. How to design any individual service, launch it so that it doesn't disrupt the organization, operate it, and then later on retire it is inherent and a key part of the ITIL documentation. And then also as part of this ITIL documentation related to any particular kind of service, they tell you about the roles, the type of people or functions that they should fill in order to offer a service, and then some ideas related to checklist documentation and procedures you should have related to offering a service. So we'll get more into detail about this stuff in just a minute. All right, so as a developer, if that's the way you think currently, you typically think in terms of delivering features to an organization or to a customer. But how is a service different than a feature? Well, I've probably touched on this already. A service is more like a utility. So think about electricity or water going to your organization or to your home. This is something that's a lot deeper. You need to make sure if you're running a service that it's always going to be available, that is backed up, that there's potential redundancy, that you have an agreement in terms of how well this service is going to perform. And so oftentimes in the IT world, it's going to involve a service is going to involve software, but software is just kind of something that gets delivered. Somebody checks it into the code repository, but running it for, thousands, millions of people is kind of a different issue. Okay, so let me just go a little further in terms of framing ITIL. So if you're talking with a network manager, their way of seeing the world is through this framework, which is the OSI model. If you're talking to a software developer, their framework for seeing the world might be the SDLC or the steps in Scrum. If you talk about a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, one way that they, kind of frame their world might be the Articles of Faith. And if we have Cobra Kai, and if we were live, I would play the video, and what's the way of the fist? Something like strike hard, strike fast, no mercy, sir. You're reading the book, The Phoenix Project. So if we want to talk with them about what's DevOps, well, DevOps might be defined by the 3 ways. All right, and so finally, I mentioned also that PMI, we talk about the PMI Book of Knowledge. So if we're talking about IT management, how we manage all of the aspects of IT, we talk about the 5 books of ITIL. And this, to be honest, is actually a little bit more focused on the ITIL version 3, which is recently deprecated, but I'll argue in a minute why it's still current. The ideas are still good. So these categories are what's really important to an IT professional that's involved with IT service management. All right, so some background on this. Now it's kind of weird, so I'll go to the last bullet point. So we got something from the United Kingdom coming out of government and public services that helps us today manage IT, which is weird because what else do we get from England these days? I mean, did they create any Googles for us or any Apples or Amazons? Like, nope. But they created the guidelines by which we manage IT, and which just kind of became the de facto standard for how we think about offering services on the IT side of the house. So back in the 80s, they began launching these books around areas of management of IT, and they expanded over time. And originally they had 31 different books, which really could be translated as there were 30 different areas that you might want to offer services in, or 30 different areas of services that you might want to consider if you're going to be an expert in everything. But that was a lot of books. And so think of it like in terms of an index of all the things that you could do in an organization related to IT. There was like 31 different categories. And so they had a book on each one. And then that was a little bit cumbersome and overwhelming. And so then they kind of combined. So it's not they threw it away. They just combined them and said, oh, okay, well, we'll just put them in major categories of what these chapters of books seem to be representing. So then we'll just have 7 books, which contain the original 31 books. And then more recently, as of ITIL 3, they had 5 books. And I'm not exactly sure with ITIL 4, which is more recent, how many there really are. But really, it's kind of the same ideas that you need to provide guidance for an IT manager in certain areas, and here's the handbook of how to do it. They just keep packaging it differently. All right, so once again, emphasizing the idea of a service. Here's an idea of a bunch of different services like dog washing, a barber, a masseuse, mowing the lawn. If you were an organization, if you offer a service, there's a lot of things that go along with offering a service, which conceptually is just different than a piece of software. Again, You have to be available at certain times. You expect certain levels of quality, etc. So going to some of the ideas that are part of ITIL version 3, and also if I were to go back a little bit, you see these 5 different books. Here's those same books again. So we start off with strategy, and really, so as you think about offering a service, you start off with some high-level ideas like, so there's a whole book around different aspects or dimensions of strategy, which kind of reminds you a little bit of the SDLC. It's kind of like, well, should I actually offer this service, yes or no? And if I am going to offer it, what should this service look like? What are the parameters of this service? Once you've actually designed it out, how this service is going to be, maybe it's a help desk, maybe it's an incident response thing, whatever it is that you're going to offer related to IT, once you start introducing it to the organization, there's a whole management framework related in a book related to different aspects of transitioning, meaning how do I roll it out to the company. Once it's out there and running, so let's take something really big and dramatic just for fun. Let's just say you have rolled out Facebook. How do I operate Facebook? Well, you better have a lot of information and data points being sent up to people who are watching all of the servers, all of the services. Make sure that everything, every single sub-service as part of the overall service of the website is running correctly. You need an army of people watching that, replacing hardware, etc. And then another idea here is continual improvement, that you want to just make everything that you do in your IT organization better and better. All right, and so you don't have to focus on this part too much. I think the other stuff is important. So, I'm just going to blab about this, but it's not that critical to this conversation. But, what is a service as they define it in the IT service management paradigm? A service is made up of capabilities and resources, and here's examples of this. So a resource that you might use to help put together a service in IT is financial, applications, data, and then a capability is, do you have the ability to manage something? Do you have processes in place that you might use on top of your application, etc.? I'm not really sure why people are in both categories, but whatever. Okay, so your world then as an IT service manager could potentially be, I have capabilities and I have resources and I make services. So the question is, what could go wrong? Well, what could go wrong is that you keep making services all the time that nobody wants. So you're going to end up with thousands of services that are out there that maybe people don't want, and that would be a large cost to the organization. And so you got to keep on top of that, and you have to retire things. So part of the overall idea here is that you have a catalog of services that you're managing, and you're thinking about what should we offer and not offer, and retire things that we don't need anymore. Okay, here's another way of looking at ITIL or thinking about it. So over on the far right-hand side, let's say you have customers of your organization. Could be a university, could be a restaurant, could, whatever it is, or maybe it's a government service. Your organization that we're calling your business offers a suite of products or services that customers value and consume. And ideally, if one of those products or services is not of value anymore, that at some point you would retire them. But let's go back a step further. In order for your organization to offer a product or service that offers value to the customer, from a service standpoint, you provide services to your organization that enables the products or services that are in turn offered to customers. So perhaps you have database backup services or email services, or on and on and on. Whatever it is that you offer, it should be of value to the business, just as the business's products or services are of value to the customer. And in truth, the business is your customer from the IT perspective. You should offer things that add value, and when they no longer add value, you retire them. So there's thought to be a life cycle related to all of the services. Okay, so I kind of mentioned this before, because there used to be 31 books and now there's 5, as part of any one of these main categories, there are ideas contained in them, and then and I'll call them a phase, I guess, here. For any of these, there's kind of like just a list of things that help you go into great depth related to things that you might want to offer. And I'm going to get more close to that in just a second. Okay, and here's that second. All right, so imagine that we didn't have our 5 little bubbles there for a moment, and we just looked at the top. Here are some areas from our 31 books of knowledge that we might want to learn more about as a manager. So let's look at some of these. Service desk. You may not have a service desk at your organization, and so you could go to the ITIL books to learn how to put into place a service desk that is world class. So take heart that you're learning this stuff right now. Imagine that you are a manager at an organization and you want to look good, and your organization has charged you with putting together a service desk that could be found at a Walmart or a Target, and they want you to be the leader in that area, and you know exactly where to go. You're like, okay, I'm going to go to the ITIL documentation, and that's going to show me how to do this. Or here's another thing, IT operations. How do you monitor your stuff that's in production? Or higher up again in this yellow, incident. How do I deal with incidents as they occur? Let me go back one and go over to the blue here. Here's another book or chapter that is a topic of consideration. Service asset and configuration. So think about an organization that has 100,000 employees and lots of things, lots of IT equipment that's checked out to them or that they use at work. There, if you include printers and iPads and monitors and stuff like that, there could easily be 300,000 assets that the IT organization is in charge of. And you might wake up one day and realize, wow, managing this is not something that we're good at. And so what you could do is you could go to the chapter on this and learn how to operate that area of your organization at the world-class level. Now, let me say something that's really important about this. As BYU students, we oftentimes we are extraordinarily good checkbox checkers. We know how we're trying to do, if we're playing bingo, we're trying to play blackout and get 100% on everything. And ITIL is not really meant to be that way. So if these are all the categories, the idea isn't for you as an IT manager to read every single chapter of what was 31 different books and implement every single aspect of every one of these areas. That's not the way you look at it. The way you look at it is, let's just say that you're happy with your organization and then you discover that you're having a problem in some area. So maybe it's availability. Maybe you're starting to have problems with your applications responding appropriately, or maybe you're having problems with repeated incidents, or maybe you're not able to track your assets very well, or you don't know how to run a service desk, etc., etc. The idea is, if you're happy and then you're not happy because of some area, you pick something out and then you start working on it. And that to me is the definition of management. You pick an area that you're going to work on for a while and study it and become world-class at it. But this is not the game of blackout related to bingo. You're not trying to cover everything on the map. That might be a waste of money. You're just going to pick out some areas where there are problems. And I think that is a critical insight as it relates to studying and understanding IT service management and ITIL. It's not do everything. It's pick out the things that you have problems in and working on those. Okay, so if these are potentially the most of the categories from the original 31 books, it's been put into kind of like an SDLC type approach here, where you start off with strategy, design, transition, operation, and then continual improvement. And that really is kind of what ITIL version 3 was about. Here's ITIL version 4, and so they're not looking at it as a process anymore. They go back and forth all the time on this, so take it with a grain of salt. It'd probably be way too much work to reinvent the wheel, but if you were to just, I apologize, it's not lined up super well here, but if you look over here on the right hand side for ITIL version 4, that they have some categories like IT asset management. Whoa, we just talked about that from ITIL version 3, or service desk. Whoa, that was there in ITIL version 3, and service design. So anyway, so they're changing things up a bit, but it's still kind of the same ideas, just kind of rehashed. Okay, so that really covers most of the things that I wanted to cover. Let me just jump through a few things here that are going to be of lesser importance, and you can read these later on. This was my summary of how to look at it before. You offer a bunch of services as an organization. ITIL shows you how to design, launch, operate, and retire those services. And the guidelines for how to put together those services are found in the documentation. If we're in class, we might do some exercises around this. How do you manage a service? What services do you provide? These are all things that would be part of working on IT service management. Here's a list of things that could be considered services related to ITIL that you offer up. I talked about the idea of service level agreements, that if you're going to offer something, here's some things that you might think about. And actually, I've got a much better one somewhere else. Here we go. So if you're going to offer a service, these are all the different aspects of a service level agreement that you might have to agree to. As it relates to the main categories, just to kind of just take a peek at what you would find in the documentation about it. Here's some questions that might be answered or aspects of it in those books. So here are some components of strategy. Design, again, another book with a bunch of sub-books as part of it. Here's some questions that you might ask and have answers to as part of that. Here's more service design. One of these aspects of service design is going to be your service catalog. Again, more service level management, transition, how you put things into play, and on and on. Aspects of service transition, operating services. These are all aspects that you might have to become better at depending on the nature of your organization, etc., etc. Continual service improvement, again, is part of it, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that covers it. If you want to look into this stuff further, you're welcome to look at these slides, but what I hope that you walk away with at this point is this understanding that as you go from earlier in your career where you may be just worried about applications to later on being tasked with handling problems, that you'll know where to go. You can go to ITIL, you can talk with ITIL professionals, you can do this, you can leverage these resources to be a top-level IT manager for your organization.